There is a railroad trestle, a bridge for trains that passes over a creek near my house. The area has become a public park today, and it's much more civilized, but 10 to 20 years ago, before it was really deep into the redneck knobs of Kentucky, wandering too far off the road could easily have you ending up on the wrong side of a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun, while some hick in overalls and bourbon breath tells you to get off his land. But right around the bridge was a notorious hangout spot for local teenagers. And they would gather there and drink nasty light beer and smoke, maybe a couple making out in the back of the car. But it was also known as a dangerous place. It had been in the local news several times, with a series of tragic events occurring there. The story was always the same. It was always a white male, aged 19 to 32. The engineers all reported seeing the victim standing in the middle of the railroad bridge, only too late to stop the massive trains. It always happens during the middle of the night. But there is something else to the story. All of the train engineers, every single one, after the accident, claimed that the victim had not been alone. They saw a second figure on the tracks with them in the moments before the accident, yet no trace of a second body was found in any of the investigations. So were all of these suicides after all, or was there something else going on sinister at the Poplick Railroad trestle? I've been to the spot and I've imagined the scenario. If you were standing in the middle of that bridge with the train bearing down on you, you would only have two choices: stand there and be struck by the train, or jump and almost certainly die upon landing. There's a legend that surrounds these mysterious suicides. They call it the legend of Goatman. They also call it the Poplick Monster. And I will get into the legend of Goatman in a minute. But for now, you just need to know this. He's known by the locals as a trickster, and his motivation seems to be to trick young men to walk out onto the bridge, onto the railroad bridge, and be killed. Rumor has it that he is half man, half goat. The mind doesn't really have far to wander to realize how such a monster like that could be born in the hillbilly knobs of Kentucky. The legend of Goatman starts during the Reconstruction period, occurring after the American Civil War. Kentucky was a split state in the Civil War, and that meant there were brothers fighting against brothers when they drew different ideological lines in the sand. Such was the case of the Humphrey brothers. They were born 10 years apart, and in those 10 years, things changed quite a lot in that area. The older brother grew up with slaves. He grew up in a culture that used slaves, and he was stubborn in his thinking. When the war came, he ended up fighting for the South. The younger brother grew up 10 years later. The area had changed a lot. There was a lot more industry. Slave ownership was on its way out already. The younger brother ended up fighting for the North. Amazingly, both brothers managed to survive the war. They came back home. They both continued to live in the same town, but they never reconciled their relationship. The younger brother sent many letters trying to have a relationship with his now only living relative, but the older brother remained a staunch Confederate. He was also said to have been a member of the KKK. Eventually, the younger brother got married and had a son. The older brother remained alone. He felt humiliated by the South's defeat, and he grew more bitter and more angry every day. But one day, he mailed his younger brother. He sent a letter saying that he regretted not being closer to his own kin, and that he needed to meet his nephew at least one time. The younger brother happily sent a reply, and they arranged for a family gathering. It was at that gathering that the older brother revealed his true colors. He stabbed his own brother in the back. Then he took the baby and he laid it on the railroad tracks to die. He took his brother's wife, and he raped her. He told her that she was his wife now. As next of kin, he inherited all of his brother's property. So he lived there, and he kept the poor woman tied in the basement, as she wouldn't stop screaming and trying to escape. Eventually, she became pregnant, but before the baby could be born, she had killed herself. The older brother, now the only brother, lived out the rest of his life as a reclusive hermit. He rarely left his property, and unlike the other farmers in the area, he didn't keep horses or cows or pigs. He kept a herd of goats. The Goatman is said to be the monstrous offspring of the unnatural relations between this twisted man and a goat. The tortured chimera is said to roam the woods around Pope Lick Trestle and trick young men into meeting the same tragic demise as the poor baby, his cousin.